I'm going to quickly do an introduction to what the FRC is. It's smaller than normal because we're not running a cohort next year because COVID made everything crazy. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Oh, can you make sure everybody is set up so they can share their screen if it isn't already?
Yep, everybody
Tyler?
should be able to, yeah.
Okay, excellent. All right. Make sure I have nothing disturbing on there. Okay, so if you are not familiar, a little bit about the faculty research community. I've been the director for a while. Before me, it was Dan Kernler, and then we ran it both together. By the way, I'm always interested in figuring out if there's someone else who wants to do this, assuming we do it again, which we may or may not. We will see. So the history of this is that at first we were one of those special projects that was funded through SSI, and then we moved to institutional support, which we were very happy about. These are the number of projects we've had, so we've been pretty consistent the last couple of years. You'll be hearing 4 of these today. The other person, because COVID, it completely messed up her data, so she needs another semester. It's kind of interesting. Obviously, we're going to have a lot of historical confound issues. And of course, the other thing is everyone's running around now doing comparison data. These are our participants for this year. So this is what we're going to be hearing about today. So Bev is going to talk about a algorithm for writing. Latasha is going to talk about, she did this massive, amazing survey about African-American student engagement. We've got Terry, not yet, Amanda did some big data crunching on accelerated learning programs, and Chastity did a really excellent project as well on grammar, which I learned a lot about grammar that I did not know. So this is just a little bit about what we do. So we work together. We've got IR in the room, although this guy is not in the room anymore, right? He got a different job. So we got IR in the room, and they help us figure out what to do and what makes sense and how to design things so our data is usable. And then they also help analyze the data, which is great because most of us do not have a statistics background. I do, but it's been a while. So I'm not sure I would be super comfortable even doing it myself. So we are very grateful to IR. Obviously, most of our projects are about pedagogy, but some of our projects are also about institutional issues, diversity, et cetera, as you just saw. So anything that might affect student success in the classroom or in the college as a whole. And that's it, because you're not getting the spiel about how you should apply and how the whole situation works. So that is it for me. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Maybe if I can figure out how. Hey, Dan. Hi, Tracy. It's really easy when people's names are on the screens. I'm figuring this out now. All right, so is anybody dying to go first?
I'll volunteer as
Yay!
tribute.
All right, so we're going to try to keep these to about 15 minutes each. We'll see what happens.
I can talk fast, so I will do that.
Take it away.
All right. Let me grab my PowerPoint. Okay. I'm going to stop the video because that just looks weird at the bottom there. All right, so my topic, as Jessica mentioned, was ALP composition student success. And I'm Amanda Smothers. I'm adjunct faculty in the English department. Hold on a second. There we go. Sorry, switching between Teams, Zoom, and Blackboard Collaborate takes some adjustment. So I examined data for my ALP courses from the spring 2020 semester, before and after the move to remote learning. And then I compared that data to fall 2020's or fall 2019's data when I also taught in English ALP. And the data examined includes attendance, assignment completion, draft submission, peer review participation, mid-semester grades, and final grades. My original plan was made before pandemic, so it did not include remote learning or obviously the pandemic. So I had to change my plans and shift the data that I collected to account for the vastly different circumstances in which my students were learning from one semester to the next. My motivation was to examine how the move to remote learning affected my ALP students and how changes in instructional approaches for English 098 from fall of 2019 to the spring of 2020 made an impact on student success. We moved to online learning last summer. There's some debate in the English department, as I'm sure there is in other departments, about offering developmental courses online, particularly regarding the impact on student success. And I wanted to see how well my students kept up with the move to remote learning as compared to ALP students as a whole at ECC. So there's a little bit of that comparison data as well. So my participants were my ALP students, the English 098 co-requisite course students, as well as my English 101 course. And I looked at data for students who were co-enrolled, as well as kind of parsing out data from students who were not enrolled in 098, just as some comparison. And then my courses were a fall 2019 evening course, and then in spring 2020 it was an evening course, and then it obviously shifted to remote learning asynchronously. So success rates, I'll just kind of give a little bit of an overview before I get into the numbers, but success rates for both 101 only and ALP students were noticeably greater, ironically, in the spring 2020 semester for me than the fall 2019 semester. The move to remote teaching in spring 2020 did not have an adverse effect on my ALP student success rates as compared to the pre-remote midterm grade. Only one student who is passing 098 at the midterm ended up below passing at the final, but the ALP student passing rates were the same for the 101 section for both midterm and final grades. Attendance rates were also noticeably better in my spring 2020 semester than in fall of 2019 for both my 101 students and my ALP students in both sections. And attendance is tied to student success, so the improved attendance rates may partially explain the increased success or completion rates. And then also draft and peer review completion rates and assignment submission rates were also much higher in my spring 2020 course. And completing assignments, participating in peer review seems to correspond to that increased course success. So I did make some changes in instruction as well from one semester. The changes made in instruction for 101 were minimal, so that section remained pretty much the same. But changes made in instruction for 098 were more significant. In the fall of 2019, they were more student-led. I left them more open-ended, asking students what they would like more clarification on and providing supplemental instruction based on student-identified objectives. I provided one-on-one assistance during work time for the completion of 101 assignments, and I used a workshop approach with supplemental formative assessments and peer feedback. So in spring 2020, I wanted to provide more structure, more supplemental instruction, and more intentional scaffolding that was pre-planned and instructor-led, and that seemed to work a lot better. I also continued the peer workshopping and small group discussion work I implemented in fall 2020, but I wove it into the course more intentionally and with more structure, and I found that to be effective. So my data was collected after the close of spring 2020 term from D2L course, my D2L course gradebook and attendance records. There was an original plan for research, as I mentioned, but that plan had to change. So I made that adjustment fairly quickly after the move to remote learning in the spring. Limitations on drawing inclusions include the limited sample size. It's just 2 sets of ALP paired courses from 2 semesters. So I would need a larger sample size for more data to draw definitive conclusions about effectiveness and student success. So some numbers. My attendance for English 098 in the fall of 2019, 90% of my students earned a C or better on their attendance. And then in the first half, and I pulled out the first half for attendance as a comparison to look at the first half for spring, because that's when we moved to the remote learning for the pandemic. And then attendance overall was 60% passing with a C or better. So it dropped off after the first half of the semester in the fall of 2019. And then assignment and quiz submission, 60% of students completed 70% or more of the assignments. midterm passing rate was 80%, and then final grade passing rate was 50%. So there's that drop off again in the second half of the semester. And then in the spring, for comparison, pre-pandemic attendance was 100%. 71% of students completed 70% or more of the assignments. Midterm grade passing rate was 85.7%, and my final grades passing rate was 71.4%. So noticeably better success rates. For the English 101 section in the fall of 2019, the attendance was 84% passing with a C or better. Overall, ALP student attendance was slightly better in the first half, was 90% passing with a C or better. And then attendance overall throughout the semester was 68% passing with a C or better, and then 70%, so slightly better with ALP students in the 101 class. And then some more data, draft submission completion rates, a little bit lower with ALP students than overall. Peer review participation was slightly lower as well with ALP students than overall. And then assignment submission was actually slightly higher among ALP students compared to the class overall. And then midterm grades, 42.1% were passing at the midterm in the 101 class. Overall, 50%, so slightly higher with ALP students. And then final grades passing slightly improved overall at 57.9%, and then remained stable at 50% with my ALP students. And then moving on to the spring semester, attendance pre-pandemic was 100% for the 101 section as well. And then ALP student attendance pre-pandemic was also 100%. So I had pretty much perfect attendance for all of my students in the first half of the semester. And then very much higher draft submission, peer review participation, and assignment submission rates for my class overall, as well as my ALP students. And then midterm grades pass rate, pretty much the same, or actually exactly the same among the class overall as ALP students. So 85.7% were passing at midterm, which is a huge difference from the previous semester. And then final grades, same 85.7% passing. So it's a bit of a comparison here to kind of visualize that. So my fall 2019 English 098 class, and this is compared to ECC overall. So in the fall of 2019, ECC overall, the department overall's ALP English 098 students passed, 64% of them passed. My class was lower at 50%, so that definitely needed improvement. And then in the spring of 2020, ECC's ALP 098 students success rate was 50%, and mine was much higher at 71.4%. And then in the 101 class, ECC's success rate for ALP students in English 101 was 59%. My class was 50%, so again, needed some improvement there. And then for the spring 2020 ECC's ALP English student success rate in English 101 was 46%, and mine was a lot higher at 85.7%. So success rates for both the 101 only and ALP students were noticeably greater for my classes in spring of 2020 than in fall of 2019. The move to remote teaching did not have an adverse effect on my ALP student success rates as compared to their pre-remote midterm grade. Only one student who was passing at midterm ended up below passing at final in 098, but those passing rates were the same. So I think the attendance played a big factor in their success, as well as changes to instructional approaches I think all of that had a good impact on that. So less successful outcomes, I think, for my ALP students in the fall 2019 semester might be explained by those instructional differences, revisions to teaching approaches made in the spring 2020 semester to improve that teaching efficacy and my learning outcomes that I made intentionally. The move to remote teaching in the spring meant that the class had time to develop connections. So they had student-student, student-instructor, and student content connections prior to the shift to online learning. And that might explain the positive outcomes after the shift. Therefore, I would recommend not drawing any conclusions about fully online delivery based on my semester's outcomes, and especially since they varied very much from the English department overall's outcomes with ALP students. But it might suggest that a hybrid or blended learning model could work well for ALP composition courses. So, you know, one option could be perhaps doing some synchronous teaching or face-to-face teaching early on in the semester before moving to a remote learning or to online learning if you want to do sort of a hybrid, or you know, have a more traditional hybrid learning model with face-to-face classes spread throughout the semester to give students that opportunity to get those connections, the student instructor, student and student content connections, or more intentional online excuse me, more intentional online development of student engagement and connection to the course. So I think I came in like a couple minutes under my 15, maybe, or maybe like 1 minute under.
You did good.
Thanks. I powered through. So if anybody has any questions about my stuff.
Questions, hold them to the end. So we make sure we get through everybody.
Sounds good.
All right, so who's dying to go next?
I can go next.
All right, Latasha, we could not hear you just now, so make sure you've got your output turned up. All right, so
Okay,
Amanda, don't forget to unshare your screen. There we go.
All right, can everyone hear me and can you see my screen?
Needs to be, I think, a little bit louder if you can.
All right.
Or we all just need to turn our volume up real high.
All right, my volume is turned up to the max, but I'll
There we go.
speak louder.
Perfect.
Okay, that's what I need to do. All right. So the faculty research community project I completed was on African American student engagement and retention at Elgin Community College. And what we know from the National Center for Education Statistics is that African American men had the lowest attainment of associate degrees from 2015 to 2016 at 33%, compared to Asian men at 44% and Caucasian men at 40%. African American women had double that, however, of African American men. As we know, women tend to have higher indicators in terms of completion rates for college degrees. African American males, however, overall, regardless if it was community college or a bachelorette degree, they had the lowest attainment rate of graduation, 20.8%, compared to 31.9% of white male students. So we know that there's a disparity that exists there. Students of color, we know, are entering community colleges at high rates. However, many African American students, amongst other minority groups, are experiencing stereotype threat and experiencing this sense of whether or not they should be there, whether or not they belong. And are they able to compete at the same levels as white students who may come from potentially more affluent areas where there was more support and more funding for teachers and for resources, AP classes? Can we compete at the same level? So they're coming in with a lack of academic self-efficacy. There was a study by a Southwestern community college with over 51% diverse students, and they completed focus groups with African American students, Latino and Latina students. And what they found that were important contributors to their success included instructional support, tutoring resources, support services, financial resources. And these students indicated that when the campus had an environment that felt like family, that helped them to feel more comfortable, more welcome, and to succeed. So the research questions that I posed in my project were: what barriers do African American students identify as challenges to attaining course and degree completion at ECC and to be engaged in the campus community? Also, what resources are students currently aware of that ECC has, and what resources would they envision for the future? Would they like to see ECC implement that would be instrumental in their success in terms of retaining at the college and in terms of completing their degree? My hypothesis is that student support services are going to be very important to African American students, as well as financial assistance, and that African American students want to engage with other diverse and representative students, but not only students, faculty, staff, and administrators, and not only internal stakeholders, but also external ECC stakeholders, such as alumni, mentors outside of ECC. I completed a Qualtrics survey, and with help from David Rudden from Institutional Research, we sent this out to all ECC students who identified themselves as African American, Black, or African on their ECC admissions application. I also received support from the Student Success Initiative Council, and it was a grant to provide 15 students at random with $50 Amazon gift cards who participated in the survey. So that was part of what I sent to them in my initial personal message to them. So they received a personal email from me appealing for them to complete the survey and letting them know that you'll have an opportunity to be able to win a $50 Amazon gift card. So we hope that that would drive the numbers and that would help incentivize students to respond. So they did. I had a pretty good response rate. I had 138 students who completely filled out the survey, so who had full data and completion of the survey. Most of the respondents were female, 78%, and it was about half and half, full-time and part-time students. The students indicated that their primary goal, 59%, their primary educational goal at ECC was to complete an associate's degree, and 25% indicated that their primary goal was to transfer to a 4-year program. I wanted to find out from students what sources of support do they currently have, and 48%, or about half of the students, indicated that they have no support. So they are financing their own education and not having support from family or friends in doing that. However, about 44% did say that they had support from their family in their educational journey. In terms of food insecurity, when we look at the numbers, so about 29% of the students said that they are experiencing food insecurity. So they were asked over the past 12 months, have you had a situation where you felt that you did not know where your next meal would come from or that you would be able to afford food? And 29% answered yes. And so we know that about 29% of African American students at ECC, at least those who responded to the survey, are experiencing food insecurity, and 28% of those students felt in the past year they didn't know if they have a stable place to live. So we know about a third of these students who responded are experiencing these difficulties. In terms of COVID impacts, I asked them how COVID had particularly impacted their lives. 22% said that they had lost their job, and 22% said that their work hours have been reduced, which makes sense that they're saying that they've experienced housing insecurity and food insecurity if they're experiencing a loss of work or reduced hours. The direct impact, however, from COVID on food and insecurity and housing insecurity was a little less, 18 and 14%. Less than 10% indicated they had contracted COVID. However, the largest percentage, 28%, said a friend or a relative had contracted COVID, someone that they knew was impacted. 14% indicated that they had actually lost a loved one due to COVID. And then some of the more anecdotal statements that they provided, students said, I lost money from savings. I went on furlough with my job. One student said, I was stuck at home with an abusive grandmother for 8 months during this pandemic. My rent increased at my apartment while my work hours were reduced. So these are some of the comments that students were making about how COVID particularly impacted them during the pandemic. Moving on, I asked students about how helpful and student-centered were resources at the college currently. And when they talked about their experience with academic supports from faculty, these are some of the services that they indicated were most helpful. Academic advising and transfer services, 36%. Admissions, 31%, the ECC bookstore, 31%, registration, 27%, and the library, 26%. So these were kind of our top performers where students said these services are most helpful to us and they're very student-centered. Of course, we still, have work to do to get to that 100%, but it was good to see that students felt like these services were helpful. Students did make comments about services that they felt were not as student-centered and as friendly and helpful. And I put some statements here anecdotally from the students just to give them a voice, and not so much to highlight specific services, but to highlight what students are saying are important that they want to see from services at ECC. One student said, "My home is loud, it's distracting. I need a place to take exams," and the testing center indicated that that would not be the place. And so students are saying during this pandemic, we need a place that's quiet, away from kids, family, chaos, to take exams, and that doesn't exist for me. One student said there's not a place for older students, so they want to see more for non-traditional students at the college. Miscommunications with records and registration. So just the whole idea, miscommunications happen. And so the student just indicated that this was something that was problematic for them and they wanted to note it in the survey. One student indicated that for tutoring, that the tutors seem to be distracted during sessions in the pandemic environment. They're doing virtual tutoring and they feel like the tutors themselves need a break in between, a 5-minute break in between sessions so that they can regroup before they go to the next student. So the student is not only showing concern for themselves, but also that the tutors may be over-resourced and they need time to regroup before they move on to the next student. Another student said they had a difficult time reaching someone at the Career Center. When I reached out, I didn't get a call back. Another student with careers said, when I followed up with an email, I got no response. And a student said, when I called admissions, I didn't receive a call back. Thankfully, my brother went to ECC and he helped me with the questions that I had. And so this was just the students really giving a voice and saying, when we reach out to services, we want to receive a phone call back. We would like them to be accessible and responsive. I asked students about services that particularly were geared towards first generation students or programs at the college or African American students. Were they aware of these services or programs? The top #1 service or program that students were aware of was Black History Month. So that's good. We're in Black History Month now, and just a little plug, there's Black History Month events to the end of the month. And so please tune into those. So students were aware of Black History Month. They also were aware of the ECC Foundation scholarships, 28%, honors program, 28%, African American Connection, 26%, Black Student Achievers, 26%, Phi Beta Kappa Honor Society, 22%, the Organization of Latin American Students, or OLAS, 20%, TRIO programs, 25%. And I do want to note, even though I asked students not only about awareness, I asked them about utilization or participation, it was negligible for a lot of the other programs, but TRIO had the highest participation. So of the 25% who were aware, 14% said they actually are participants in that program. So I wanted to note that. And then Triumph, 14%. I asked students, if these types of programs were implemented, would you be interested in attending and participating? And so by far the #1 program the students said they would like ECC to implement are more mentorship relationships. They want mentorship relationships with professionals of color, mentorship relationships with African American professionals. So that could be alumni, it could be external stakeholders, or it could be internal. They also said, we want a pipeline for ECC students to be able to obtain employment after we graduate. For example, there are a lot of programs that are around the country that are recruiting African American men to become teachers because there are not a lot of African American men who are in the classrooms K through 12, and African American young boys, especially in urban areas, need role models. And so if you participate in a teaching program and you graduate, then there's a pipeline to the school district to obtain positions for African American men. So they want to see programs like that connected to employment opportunities when they graduate. An increased number of scholarships, they would like to see 31%, an increased number of scholarships that are designated or earmarked for diverse students of color. They want more ethnically and culturally diverse courses, and they want them taught potentially by diverse faculty. And the students were interested. They want to see more diverse faculty at ECC, but also more diverse staff. And they want opportunities to connect not only with other diverse African American students, but also administrators and faculty and staff. They want those opportunities to engage. Finally, I asked students about faculty support services. What are they receiving from faculty? What are they currently getting? What would they like to see? 46% said they have faculty-led synchronous face-to-face or in-person lectures. Office hours was a little bit low, 30%, being that all faculty are supposed to offer office hours. So either students are confused about when the office hours are, or they just don't feel like they exist, or that faculty are allowing time for students to meet with them. And so it was only 30% that said they were recognizing that faculty were regularly offering office hours. Faculty recorded lectures, 26%, synchronous face-to-face or in-person tutoring sessions. About 14% of students said their faculty members were doing that for students. And then also faculty recorded tutoring sessions, a little bit under 10%. Some of the other services they said they're receiving is face-to-face labs, faculty clarification on projects via email was helpful. And then also one student said that a faculty member at ECC was willing to, and they named the name, but I took it out for the presentation, but they were willing to meet with them outside of their office hours to accommodate them in their daycare needs for their son. So they were really appreciative of faculty flexibility. So these are some things they said they would like faculty to do. They want faculty to be aware that this pandemic has taken a mental toll on everyone. One person said therapy. So maybe they aren't aware, and that just shows us we have more work to do in terms of awareness of wellness services and what we do offer. So they're recognizing that it's taking a mental health toll. They also would like more videos, Zoom meetings that explain materials, recorded sessions, these additional materials that provide context and support for the students. They're asking faculty for that. Regular office hours, it came up again. This student said, unfortunately, most faculty do not set aside time for that. So there's a perception there that faculty are not necessarily always available via office hours. One student said they like to see more guest speakers. And then there were several students that said, we're good. We're getting what we need from ECC and the faculty. And one student went to say, I can't think of any additional support that I would need from ECC. I think the college has done a great job of offering academic support for my in-person culinary classes, as well as online access to D2L. So there were several students that just said, we think we're getting what we need. And so I think that's important to note. In conclusion, African-American students require resources, increased scholarships, help with food and housing insecurity needs. As the college has, gathered resources to help students in financial need, it's necessary during this pandemic, and help addressing COVID impacts. African-American students do value diversity at ECC, including in senior leadership. They would like to see diversity reflected not only in the students, in the staff, the faculty, and administrators. From faculty, they would like to see more Zoom sessions, recorded lectures, tutoring, or support services in this virtual e-learning environment. And from student services, they're saying we want student services to be accessible and to be available. And when we reach out, we want you to reach back because we really need the help. In terms of further research, I did ask students in the survey about their utilization of diverse classes in the catalog. And so that's something that I still have to unpack. And then their utilization, not just their experience with support services, but how they've utilized them. And so that's something I have to unpack with the survey. And then focus groups in the future, that may be something to think about because that provides more context around what students are saying. And so in conclusion, just want to thank the survey participants and then the faculty research community, Jessica Carpenter, Dave Rutten, and then the SSI Equity Coordinating Council for the grant, and then my fellow FRC members. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Okay, excellent, excellent. So much good data in there. By the way, if people could send me all copies of their PowerPoint and copy, I think Tyler probably would love those as well. If you're willing to do that, we would really love, I'm thinking about multiple people who really need to see some of this data. again, going through this. So, and I know there'll be a recording, but let's face it, a lot of people are more likely to look at a PowerPoint than to watch an hour-long recording. I realized I changed this to I'm not a cat, and then immediately my cat got in the picture. I swear, Kinto's the cat, I'm not the cat. Let's see, Chastity, you're in the middle of the screen. Let's go to you. Chastity has an extremely good looking PowerPoint that I am not capable of making. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
All right, so I am Chastity. I teach in the English department, and I wanted to find ways to break bad grammar that I was seeing in students' writing, and I wanted to connect that to improving the writing quality of students' submissions. All right, so I kind of mentioned the purpose already, was to determine effective instructional teaching methods of grammar. So I wanted to find out what works. And then I wanted to create strategies of connection moments between good grammar and good writing. And I'm using the terms good and bad loosely. But what I wanted to help students do is to see how grammar is a tool to assist them in writing better. All right, so my hypothesis was that quality grammar instruction could improve students' writing quality when at least four characteristics were in place. First is that students are given examples of published writing demonstrating specific grammatical concepts. So I wanted them to understand that these are not just things that you do in a classroom setting, but this is what professional writers do. The second trait is that students would engage in grammar instruction in a layered approach. I'm going to talk about later what I mean when I say layered. And then third is students pointing out connections between good grammar and writing grammar. And then the fourth thing would be that students revise their own writing for grammatical errors. All right, so what kind of sparked me doing this research is I gave my students a diagnostic test, and my students who were in 098, 101, and 102. And I wanted to, first of all, verify that grammar was indeed an issue. I wanted to see, was there a range? Like, for example, were students stronger by the time they got to English 102? And I wanted to begin to look at, okay, specifically, what do they need help with? And I was honestly surprised by the results because they are pretty similar. There is some variation between English 098 and English 101, but particularly from 101 to 102, students' results were not improving. And I gave the same test across all three courses. And unfortunately, students, nobody was passing. No particular section had even a proficiency level. And so that was concerning. And so because of those results, I decided that I wanted to look at all of my students and all of my comp classes, that they would be a part of the study. So my methodology was that, and it modified once we went online. So when we were in person, on the first day of class, students were given a diagnostic that was a grammar test. I also added a writing diagnostic test as well. And then during online instruction, I just focused on the writing diagnostic because I did not have a way to do the grammar diagnostic online. And I also did not want students to be tempted to look the answers up online because that would defeat the purpose. And then when I looked at the results from the diagnostics and for the grammar that I gave in person, I broke them down into categories. And then for the writing diagnostic, I broke those down into grammar and writing categories. And from those observations, I noted what the top areas were in terms of where students needed support. And then I began to center my instruction on those areas. All right, so my findings were that the top grammatical errors across the board were run-on sentences, comma splices, and fragments. And that was consistent with what I found with the diagnostic test, and that continued to be consistent when I started looking at the essays that they were turning in. And their top writing deficiencies were weak thesis statements and weak topic sentences. So when I found out what the key areas were, that meant some topics I did not even cover because based on the research, they were not a need for the students. So how I use the data to inform instruction, I'll give you one example. So one of the top mistakes that students had was fragments. And so what I did was I gathered a sample of just about 25 fragments from students' essays. And I studied each one of those examples to identify, okay, why are students writing fragments? What's missing? What skill is lacking? And I observed that the most common mistake was that students were starting sentences with subordinating conjunctions. And so it appeared that they were trying to write a complex sentence and they just didn't know how to do it. And so that was very helpful in my instruction because a lot of the materials that are available for teaching fragments focuses on subject, verb, and expressing a complete thought. Well, when I looked at the data, I could tell that that was not the issue that my students were having. And so if I were to give them some activities, picking out the subject and the verb, they're going to do well. And then I would read their paper and still see fragments and there would be a disconnect. And so by looking at what they actually submitted, that helped give me insight about what they actually needed. So then I created instruction to target those specific areas. And so basically what I ask myself is, if a student's going to write a complex sentence using a subordinated conjunction, what do they need to know? And I broke all of those steps down into mini lessons. And then I also created proofreading exercises so that students could begin to self-identify and self-correct these mistakes. So I talked about the layered approach for grammar instruction. So I use what I'm just calling it a layered approach, and basically just means that I taught grammar in multiple ways. So when we were in person, I was doing a flipped classroom model. So I was creating lecture videos, and I still do those on grammatical concepts. And so those videos were very short videos, probably 5 minutes or less. And I would break concepts down very, very small for students' attention span. And sometimes the videos will have questions embedded in them or activities or guided notes to make sure that students were getting the information. The second thing was that there were worksheets, there were stations, sometimes there was games, computer-based activities, writing exercises that they were doing, and they were just learning the material multiple times, multiple ways. And I did a survey when we were in person, and I asked students specifically about all the different approaches that I was using for grammar. I wanted to know, did the students enjoy them? Did they find them effective? I was surprised that my students said, we love everything you're doing, including worksheets, which I thought was interesting because there's a lot of thought that worksheets are dead. Granted, I didn't give them all worksheets, but students were like, we love all of this. We just want you to give us more. So what that indicated to me was that students wanted more time to practice and gain mastery and gain comfort with the concepts that they were learning. And so I would take these concepts and have students proofread. So when they were writing rough drafts, I would create proofreading exercises specifically for those areas that students were struggling in. And then I would give them model sentences and say, hey, okay, I want you to write a sentence that mimics the model. And then when at the end of the semester, they would also create presentations on the different concepts. I also would have students correct their papers. They would pick some sentences from their graded essays and I would say, okay, I want you to fix these. So that also helps students to see how their own work could function as a teaching document. All right, so final results. So just in terms of looking at my English 102 students, I'm just focusing on one because the time for this presentation is very short. When those students first turned in their essays, I was baffled at the number of misspelled words and fragments and so on and so forth. And so I was thinking in an online environment, this is probably going to be a challenge for those students to improve. I was blown away that when they did their research essay, most students had no fragments. I only had, let's see, most students had less than 3 run-on sentences or comma splices, and most students' writing was clearer and easy to understand. And so I was able to come to these conclusions by looking at their grammar and writing codes, because I would codify their feedback. So I could look at what they submitted in their first essay to then what they submitted in their final essay to see that they had grown. I had some students that didn't know how to use spell check. I was very surprised by this, but I did an office hours appointment and shared my screen and showed the student how to use spell check. So again, the research opened up me asking different questions and just kind of having fewer assumptions about what students already knew. So my takeaways were that students can break bad grammar instruction when instruction is specific to the bad elements. And so narrowing down and figuring out, okay, what are they really struggling with? Focusing on specific skills and assessing multiple ways yields improvement in grammar and writing quality. So I implemented, for example, when we were in person, grammar tests, because that accountability of having to take a test helps students take the material more seriously. Also, grammar instruction works when taught in a layered approach. All right, so what's next? So based on this research, I'm creating an interactive digital board in which students will be able to kind of self-direct and determine, okay, these are the things that I'm struggling with, and I want to kind of walk through some exercises and improve. So what you see there are links to instructional videos. So I'm basically taking the videos that I have created for instruction, putting those on like a Google slide that students can go in and search and watch on their own time, but also there'll be activities, self-graded quizzes so that students can have the additional practice for the areas that they need support in. So many of you who are in this session probably are not in the English department. And so while grammar may be somewhat interesting, you may be wondering, how can I use this in your own teaching practice? So here are just a few recommendations. Would be for you to identify a skill or a concept that your students are struggling with, and just for you to measure where your students are when they enter your classroom. And when you get that data, to actually look at it to determine, okay, what are they struggling with? And then tailor your instruction based on what students submitted. Teaching a layered approach, in other words, just have more than one way of teaching a concept. Assess multiple times throughout the instruction. That way you can course correct. And also it helps students have a sense of where they are. And then lastly, just measure student progress at the beginning, at the end, so that you can see if what you're doing is working, and then make the necessary adjustments. So that concludes my presentation.
Excellent. Yay. Is it incredibly embarrassing that I think I just realized today that that's a play on the TV show Breaking Bad?
That's okay. That's okay.
Ergo, you had the most clever title of anyone, and I completely missed it. Okay, next, we've got Bev. Bev, take it away. You're gonna make sure to unmute yourself and hit the green share screen button at top or the bottom of your screen, whichever, wherever it is. We can't hear you. You're muted.
Can
There
you
you
hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I don't have my PowerPoint to share. I thought I would just verbalize what I did, but I could send the PowerPoint.
That'll work.
Okay. By the way, I was very impressed with that last presentation. I think she gave some wonderful ideas. Well, my presentation was using an algorithm to teach writing. This is the third attempt to help Business 101 students write on demand the 4 kinds of standard English sentences. The hypothesis was that given writing materials, encouragement, directions, and feedback, students following the commands of the algorithms will learn to create well-structured, correctly punctuated sentences. For the purpose of this project, algorithm is defined as a way of solving a certain type of problem, usually repeating basic steps. An algorithm is used by following the commands given in its steps. Algorithms, like instructions, and are written in command language. For example, close the door. For the purpose of this course, examples will be given with a hint after some steps. And the purpose of the examples and the hints is to help users understand the commands. The materials provided were some PowerPoints on understanding a sentence, understanding sentences, punctuation, understanding parts of sentence, understanding punctuation marks. There were handouts on pronouns, prepositions, subordinate conjunctions, and transitions. Examples of completed algorithms were given, and instructions on how to follow the algorithms. There was a motivation section, and indicating that success requires work, persistence, and commitment. The algorithms were uploaded into D2L in the discussion area. Directions were given on each set. There were 4 in the simple sentence set, 3 in compound sentences, 2 in complex sentences, and 3 in compound complex sentences. There were 14 participants, 11 male, 3 female. The age range was from teenage to middle age. They ranged from first semester students, 18 years of age, to a returning student with over 30 years out of school. They came from countries of mixed origin, several I did not know. There clearly were Black students, white students, Hispanic students, Arab students. What else? I'm not sure. Okay, now the limitations on this research were that the low number of participants, and there was no holding for age or previous training or outside help. The data collected were 4. There was a writing sample collected the first week of the semester, and that consisted of 10 questions about themselves and their background. A case study done the 3rd week on listening habits, a self-assessment. They wrote paragraphs describing their 2 best listening habits and why they thought they were the best, and 2 habits they thought needed improvement and how they thought they could improve them. Then at the end of the semester, case study 5 was a learning self-assessment on 3 topics that they learned and considered important and how they will apply in the future what they learned. And then there was an original paragraph they were to write. And they chose the topic using 1 each of the 4 kinds of standard English sentences. Now this was doing the algorithms was optional. Only 8 students accepted the challenge. 4 did all 12. 4 students did between 1 and 10, and 1 did only the final algorithm on complex sentences. The results, the comparison between early and late, I have a table here, which I won't go into all of it, but of the participating students, there were 66 fewer total writing errors at the end. It went from 50 to 17. And these were comma and semicolon errors, and then general writing errors, fragments, subject-verb agreement, pronoun antecedent agreement errors, and fillers, and that kind of thing. They had 51% fewer punctuation errors. In the early writing, they had 33. In the late writing, they had 13. Now, there were 14 students. 8 actually did the algorithms. 3 others did some grammar in D2L. Now, the interesting thing is that the students who actually did the algorithms, who chose to do the algorithms, made more mistakes at the beginning and had more mistakes at the end. So they were the ones who really needed to benefit from this work. The other students, 3 who did the D2L, went from 17 to 5 errors. And the 3 students who did no algorithms and no D2L grammar went from 19 to 5. So I thought it was interesting that The students who actually could benefit more are the ones who chose to participate. Okay, now the results are not statistically interesting or valid because of the small number, and there was no control for outside help. But there was anecdotal evidence of improvement. One student said, the algorithms have helped me identify sentence types. This simple understanding is a vast improvement. Another one said, yes, I haven't been in school for over 30 years, and this course helped me understand everything that I had forgotten. Another student said, another skill that I enjoyed learning throughout the course are the punctuation skills and the verb skills. Relearning the skills of how to effectively use words in a sentence and identifying verbs and such is especially helpful. Now, the first student there did all 12 algorithms. That second one did 5, and this last one did only 1. So in conclusion, I think the hypothesis was supported because there were fewer total errors, fewer comma and semicolon errors, and the students were more confident and saw progress in their own work. And in a way, the hypothesis is not supported because there were no error-free paragraphs. The algorithm challenge was in addition to coursework. And it's hard to incentivize students when they work 2 jobs plus school or work full-time and are full-time students. Or they have school plus family responsibilities. So, for example, one student who did no algorithms, but obviously went in there to see them, said she was sure she would be helped by them, but they were super long. Now, before I actually used these, I cut down on the length of them because I thought, you know, if you don't know that a pronoun can be a subject in a sentence, you're not going to deal with object of the preposition or a direct object of the verb. I really concluded in addition that some of the things I could do in the future is describe the use of algorithms in the course orientation. I did not do that this time. I do mention that in the orientation for the D2L exercises, because if you get 100% on one of those exercises, you get 5 credit points. And one of the students who did no algorithms, but did dozens of those D2L exercises, emailed me after the course and said he learned a lot in the course. I could make the algorithms available from start date to end date and offer as an extra credit option, which I think would be good for the motivated students, someone who sees writing as important and wants to develop that skill. These algorithms or work on the algorithms are not needed or wanted by all the Business 101 students. I kind of thought that at the beginning because not every student who comes into a Business 101, well, let's put it this way. As one student said, I went to a private high school and they taught us well. And yeah, he got an A in the course. So, you know, there's a wide, very, very wide range of abilities in that course. And that's why this was just another attempt to help those students who don't come from advantaged homes to develop their writing skills. Simply that.
Okay, Tyler has informed us that they do not have a hard stop here. So if people want to ask questions and stick around, that is fine. I don't have office hours for another half hour. So if any of the presenters need to go, also fine. Does anybody need to go right away? Mary, yes, but you're not a presenter, so you're good. Okay, so anybody who wants to can go ahead and unmute, or actually we'll do raise your hand because there are a lot more people in here than I'm seeing because I only have video people on. So I'm waiting to see if anyone clicks the raise hand button. It's very exciting. Yes, Manny. Okay, Manny, go ahead. Don't forget to unmute.
Yeah, my question is for Professor Gunn. I like the idea. You did some analysis for what students might need, right? This is beforehand, I'm guessing, before you started the semester. And then you you targeted your instruction on what identified as the most need for your students. I wonder if you worried about not covering enough content by doing this and how you dealt with that.
That's a good question. I think what I learned in doing the research was that less was more, and to go deeper with the activities because it was taking some students longer to acquire proficiency because some of the students had not been taught some of the concepts. And so it was all new information. And so there were some things that I had been teaching that I no longer teach based on the research. So it is a lot to cover. But I think seeing the research helped me identify, okay, these are the things that are the most important, and just to start focusing on those. And then hopefully my instruction will improve, and their learning and improve, that I can add other topics in.
Awesome, thanks.
All right, anybody else? Any more blue hands? Blue hands, warm heart. Okay, Tyler?
I always forget how to do like the Zoom hand, so I was worried about physical hand.
Yeah,
My
it's
question for
hard.
Professor Gunn as well. So I really appreciate the presentation. It was fantastic. I was really interested in the way you shared about sort of targeting it based on the specific problem. So not just assuming that, oh, they need subject verb agreement stuff, but like it's the matter of complex problems. And so I was interested, like, in the way that you did that impact the way that you teach other things outside of grammar also? Or like, do you see that impacting the way you might teach like thesis statements or topic sentences, like other problem issues? Like, does this change things beyond the grammar instruction too, I guess is my question.
Yes, it does. So I got really excited doing this. So I would take essays that students were not doing well on, and then I would identify, okay, what are they struggling with? And then to list out the skills. And of course, I had to keep that size manageable. But from looking specifically at their writing, I now do what I call paragraph clinics. And I give students a paragraph, and we focus on a particular concept that I saw as an issue in students' writing. And so it was very helpful for me to begin to see where are they having disconnects, and then creating content based on what they're struggling with. And students also told me that they liked when I did demo videos. So where I would have like a document camera and like talk them through, like, this is how you can fix something. That seemed to help them improve their writing. So this did open up other areas.
Anyone else have a question? Oh, I would, this is not a question, but the office hours thing that we were talking about, it's been very strange for me this semester too. All my students suddenly seem to think my office hours are only by appointment. They're not. It's in the handout. It's on the homepage of the course. Like, it very clearly says, here's your 10 hours a week. And yet I keep getting emails saying, let me set up an appointment. It's like office hours. So I think there's a disconnect there for students, and I'm not sure where it's coming from, but it might be coming from the fact that currently in the MOU, there's a difference, or in the guidance we got from admin, let me say, it's not, I don't think in the MOU, about different ways to do office hours, including things like by appointment. So I actually had no idea any faculty did office hours by appointment. What, really? You mean I don't have to sit in front of the computer for 10 hours? I can just have them like give me a time in advance? And honestly, at that point, I would way open up my times if they were scheduled by appointment. So, I mean, that's something we might want to think about too, is, I have a student this week who wants to schedule with me. She's like, well, I can't do any of your office hours. Can we meet at 8 o'clock at night? If that happens once, it's fine. But if that happens all the time, that's not going to happen. So having flexibility might be interesting if people are doing that anyway. So not my area or my decision. Yeah, so Kellen's saying he does all of his by Doodle and they pick the time that works. And you're seeing an increase. All right, so
Yes.
yeah, that's something I'm going to be thinking about for next semester, is giving them a place to go because they just seem hyper confused about office hours, and I've never seen that issue before.
Yeah, I can just say, like, that's one thing I was going to say. I thought that was a really interesting idea that Latasha brought up. And it's something my students have talked a lot about too, is that they're like, oh, that professor isn't giving office hours. And it's just, yeah, there's a missing perception. It would be interesting to think how we as an institution can work to make sure that that's more clearly articulated to students, and that we make sure that they know that professors are there and want to work with them more clearly. Because yeah, a lot of my students have been not seeing that. Can I ask a question now?
Yes.
Sorry, Latasha, can I ask you a question? This data is fantastic. It's so rich, it's so helpful, it's so direct, it gives so many specific, concrete things that we as an institution can do. I'm obsessed. I was curious, if you had to pick one or two areas, immediate things that you would recommend we do, what would they be and why? Like if you could say we're doing this as an institution tomorrow, what would you pick?
I think it was important for, and that's a good question. Thank you, Kellen. I think it's important to be accessible and available to our students. So, if it were that, we set kind of a institutional time frame that we respond to students across faculty, across academic support services, that, when students call Latasha Dehan or they call the academic transfer or academic advising or whatever the case may be, that we get back within 24 to 48 hours. Like we have a kind of institutional standard, because students want to know that we're available and we're responsive, especially with everything being remote. And so I really heard the students saying that they want faculty, they want administrators, they want staff to be responsive to them and available. So I think that if I could just pick one thing, then let's just be responsive. Let's be there. Let's let the students know we're really there to support them and be welcoming, because a lot of times students will get, especially students of color or students who are kind of coming into it with imposter syndrome or stereotype threat, they get intimidated when they don't feel like it's a welcoming environment, and when we don't get right back to them. It makes them feel as if, you're not available, you're not accessible, and I'm not welcomed. And so I think that we want to, even though a lot of students did say we are getting what we need, I think it's just, looking at as an institution, let's be responsive, let's be welcoming, let's be there. Let's let these students know that we want them to succeed.
I
I
like
have
hearing
another
someone's
question.
obsessed with our data. Yay.
That's
Her
really
data.
cool.
I had
Thank you.
minimal contribution. Mandy, is that a new hand or an old hand?
Yeah, no, it's a new hand.
Okay,
I have a question
ahead.
for Dr. Dehan. After looking at that data, I'm just curious, did anything surprise you, based on, and more specifically, about our Black students at ECC? Like, any of the data surprise you as distinctly different from what you were expecting?
I did actually have some data that surprised me. That's a good question. Thank you, Mandy. The students were saying, when I asked them, and I didn't include it in this presentation just for time, but one of the things I asked them about was microaggressions, if they had experienced microaggressions, and I gave them a definition for what microaggressions are. And so it's kind of limited what you can do in an actual survey versus focus groups. But I gave them a definition for microaggressions and asked had they experienced it, and just about 9% said they did. And so I thought that that would be a greater number, that indicated that they had experienced some kind of implicit bias, or statements that were made to them that and students did, those who did say they had experienced it, gave me examples of it, that they had experienced right here at ECC, sometimes from other students, faculty, as well. But I thought that number would be greater. So I didn't know if students didn't understand, just based on the definition, what microaggressions were. Would I get a different response if I sat down and actually talked to students and we were able to talk about scenarios and say, yes, that's a microaggression. No, that's not. So that did surprise me a little bit, because I thought students would have had, but that's a good thing though. That was a good thing. That was a good indicator that only 9% of students who responded to the survey said they had in fact experienced that at ECC. That was a good indicator, however.
Thanks.
That's a great question. We talked about that particular issue at length when we were at the end of when we had the data. Anybody else have a question? Raise your hand. Or if you've got your video on, you can just do this. All right, well, to end the session, of course, the last thing I have to do is show cats who are not getting along right now. Usually they're all cuddled up and adorable. Not so adorable, guys. Thanks for that.